she was paid to care for him, not to fall in love. In the quiet countryside of North Yorkshire, where narrow roads curled through fields of green and old stone houses leaned gently into history, no one expected tragedy to arrive the way it did. This was a place where days passed slowly, where neighbors measured time by church bells and sunset shadows, and where scandal felt like something that only happened elsewhere. Her name was Hannah Whitmore, and she was 34 years old. Hannah had not planned to stay in Yorkshire forever. She had arrived after her life in Manchester quietly unraveled. A long relationship ended, her mother lost to illness, and a growing sense that everything familiar had slipped through her fingers at once. Care work had always been her refuge. It was structured, purposeful, human. She was good at it. Patients trusted her. Families praised her patience. Agencies called her dependable, gentle, professional. When the placement offer arrived, a live-in role caring for an elderly man in a rural village, Hannah accepted without hesitation. It promised stability, decent pay, and time to think. The man she was hired to care for was Edward Collins. Edward was 78, a retired property developer whose wealth had been built brick by brick over decades. His hands trembled now, betrayed by Parkinson's disease, but his mind remained sharp. He spoke slowly, chose his words carefully, and remembered details others forgot. He lived in a large countryside house with his wife of over 40 years, Margaret Collins. Margaret was 69 and carried herself with precision. Her hair was always neat, her clothes understated but expensive, her voice calm and measured. To outsiders, she appeared devoted, a woman who had stood by her husband through success, decline, and illness. But inside the house, the warmth was gone. Edward and Margaret existed side by side rather than together. Conversations were practical, affection was absent. Their marriage had become an arrangement shaped by routine, reputation, and money. Hannah noticed this quickly. From her first week, Edward gravitated toward her presence. He appreciated that she didn't rush him, didn't finish his sentences, didn't look away when his hands shook. She listened when he spoke about the past, about buying his first property with borrowed money, about the risks he took, about how success had slowly changed the people around him. Margaret watched quietly. At first, she was relieved. Edward was calmer, his moods improved, his sleep became more regular. Hannah was doing her job well, and Margaret enjoyed the freedom it gave her, afternoons out, visits to London, weekends away with friends. But something shifted. Edward began asking Hannah to stay longer in the evenings, to sit with him by the fire, to talk, to read aloud when his voice tired. He shared thoughts he had never spoken aloud, regrets, loneliness, the ache of being alive but unseen. Hannah told herself she was just being kind, but kindness, repeated daily, has a way of turning into connection. Over time, their conversations deepened. Edward spoke of how his marriage had slowly emptied of love. Margaret, he said, cared more for structure than emotion, more for legacy than intimacy. Hannah listened, empathetic but careful, reminding herself of boundaries. Yet loneliness does not respect boundaries. Hannah was alone in a village where she knew no one. Edward was trapped in a life that felt finished, while his heart still wanted warmth. They found comfort in each other's presence, then in each other's understanding. And then, quietly, without a moment they could clearly name, they fell in love. It was not dramatic, it was not reckless. It unfolded slowly, shared looks, softened voices, moments that lingered too long. It lived behind closed doors and unspoken rules. Edward confided in Hannah more than he ever had in Margaret. He told her that she had made his final years meaningful, that she had reminded him he was still human, not just fading. One evening, as rain tapped against the windows, Edward spoke words that would change everything. He told Hannah he planned to change his will. Not out of impulse, he said, but intention, gratitude, love. He wanted to ensure she was provided for after he was gone, a portion of his estate, modest by his standards, life-changing by hers. Hannah was stunned. She told him she didn't want his money, that their relationship, whatever it was, should not be tied to inheritance. But Edward insisted. He said this was his choice, his right. What Hannah didn't know was that Margaret had already begun to notice. Edward had changed. He smiled more, guarded his phone, asked about legal paperwork, requested private meetings with his solicitor. Margaret was observant, and she trusted patterns more than words. She investigated quietly. She checked phone records, noticed messages deleted but not erased, followed Hannah one afternoon when she went into town. She saw how Edward watched Hannah when he thought no one noticed. The truth settled in slowly, and when it did, it terrified her. This wasn't just an affair. This was a threat. Edward's wealth was not merely money, it was security for their children, status, stability, the foundation of everything Margaret believed she had protected for decades, and Hannah was standing in its path. Margaret did not confront Edward. She did not accuse Hannah. Instead, she planned. She contacted Hannah directly, her tone calm and measured. She suggested they talk privately, woman to woman. She said she wanted peace, closure, a dignified end to an uncomfortable situation. She chose the location carefully, an abandoned quarry on the edge of the village, overgrown, isolated, far from cameras or passers-by, a place where sound traveled poorly and people rarely went. Hannah hesitated, but guilt is persuasive, and hope even more so. She believed honesty might end the tension, that she could leave the job quietly, that everyone could move on without destruction. She told Edward she would be back before dark. She never returned. The next morning, a dog walker discovered Hannah's body partially concealed by bushes near the quarry. She had been shot once in the chest, no signs of robbery, no evidence of a struggle. The village awoke to sirens. At first, police considered a random attack, but the scene didn't fit. Hannah's phone was missing, but her bag and belongings were untouched. The bullet told a different story, controlled, deliberate. Detectives rebuilt Hannah's final hours piece by piece. Phone records, GPS data, deleted messages recovered by specialists. Margaret's car had been near the quarry that evening. When questioned, Margaret claimed she had been visiting a friend. The friend denied it. Surveillance cameras showed Margaret's car on a road she claimed not to have driven. Forensic tests revealed Forex residue on a coat Margaret said she hadn't worn in years. The bullet was matched to a legally registered firearm in Margaret's name. The truth became unavoidable. Margaret Collins was arrested and charged with murder. Edward was informed days later in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and quiet dread. When he learned that Hannah, the woman who had brought light into his final years, was dead and that his wife was responsible, something inside him collapsed. He suffered a massive heart attack that night. Edward Collins died 3 days later. Margaret did not attend his funeral. At trial, prosecutors described a crime driven not by jealousy, but by fear. Fear of loss, fear of displacement, fear of watching a lifetime of control unravel. Margaret was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. Edward's estate was frozen in years of legal disputes. Hannah's family received sympathy, headlines, and grief, but no justice that felt complete. And the house in Yorkshire, once filled with wealth and silence, stood empty. A reminder that Hannah was paid to care for him, but loving him cost her life.